Most of that's true. Welcome. I'm originally from Sydney, Australia, and we have a beautiful tradition there in the Indigenous population that every time you gather to share wisdom or come together, you do a welcome to country if it's your tribe's land. If it's not your land and you're not a member of that direct community, they call it an acknowledgement of country. And so I just like to sort of honour that tradition because I think it's really beautiful. You can close your eyes if you like, but just feeling into the earth underneath you and acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land.
This is Justine Ruszczyk. On July 15, 2017, Justine was shot and killed by a Minneapolis police officer. She was unarmed and in her pajamas. Months later, the officer who killed her has still not been charged with a crime.
Squad 530 to 5024 Washburn Avenue South, female screaming behind the building.
Okay. 530, shots fired. Can we get EMS code 3 Washburn and 51st Street? Got one down.
Copy, shots fired at Washburn and 53rd Street. Correction, 51st. Sergeant to acknowledge shots fired and one down at Washburn. Copy. Copy 502.
506 as well.
Copy 506.
Flight to vertical impending and 10 out.
Copy.
530, I'm starting CPR.
Copy 530, starting CPR.
530, we're in the mouth of the alleyway, 51st Street, Washburn, even side.
Copy, north of alley, 50 at 51st Street, even side. Copy 520, arrived out with them. Squad 530, are you code 4 for medical?
530, code 4 for medical.
530, code 4 for medical at 2345.
530, there are no suspects at large.
Copy 530, no suspects at large.
520, where is EMS on this?
EMS is coming, rescue is coming.
Now to major questions about a fatal police shooting in Minneapolis. A woman killed after calling 911 to report a disturbance outside. Officers' body cameras were not turned on during the incident, and ABC's Lindsay Janis is here with that story. Good morning, Lindsay.
Good morning to you, Robin. Justine Damond was just 40 years old. She was due to be married next month. She was calling 911 to report a disturbance in the alley behind her home, but somehow she ended up dead. Overnight, a Minnesota community coming together to mourn a 40-year-old meditation and yoga instructor who was shot by police after she called 911 to report a possible assault in the alley behind her home.
We want to remember a really peaceful, lovely woman.
The woman, Justine Damond, was originally from Australia and due to marry her fiance, Don Damond, next month. Her stepson, Zach, the first family member to arrive at the scene.
My mom is dead because the police officer shot her for reasons I don't know.
The Minneapolis Star-Tribune reports that 2 officers in one car responded to Justine's 911 call. They pulled into an alley about 100 feet behind her home. Wearing her pajamas and not carrying a weapon, Justine came out to explain why she called 911. While speaking to the officer in the driver's seat, the officer in the passenger seat pulled out a gun and shot her through the driver's side door. The police department saying the officer's body cameras were not turned on and the squad car did not capture the incident. Both officers on leave this morning. The community desperate for answers.
I am heartsick and deeply disturbed. I have a lot of questions about why the body cameras weren't on.
The neighborhood had 3 lights mounted on telephone poles between Justine's house and the alley. Most garages in the vicinity had motion detection lights. The body cam rollout for Minneapolis police was complete following last year's death of Philando Castile, who was shot and killed by a cop while his girlfriend captured it on Facebook live stream. A month ago, the officer in that case was acquitted.
Justine's fiance was away on a business trip when she was killed. Investigators are still scouring the area for possible security video, hoping that maybe the shooting was caught on camera. In the meantime, so many questions about what happened.
And still no excuse why those body cameras were not on?
Nope.
All right, just heartbreaking. All right, Lindsay, thanks so much.
This is a Fox News alert. There is breaking news in the case of the Australian woman shot to death by a police officer in Minneapolis after calling 911 to report a crime. Fox Minneapolis reporter Christina Palladino joins us with details. Christina.
Tucker, this is the alleyway here in southwest Minneapolis where 40-year-old Justine Damond was shot and killed by a Minneapolis police officer. She was shot just a few doors down from her home on Saturday night. We understand that Damond was calling to report a possible assault happening in this alleyway. Now, we just got an update from the state agency investigating. They tell us that the two officers were patrolling in their car with their lights off when Damond came out of nowhere and startled both of them. We understand that 31-year-old officer Mohammed Noor was in the passenger seat. He is the one who shot Damond in the abdomen. She died on scene. Investigators say she did not have a weapon on her, and the body cameras of the police officers, as well as their squad camera video, were not turned on. Now, Damond, she moved here from Sydney, Australia 3 years ago to be with her fiance. She was set to marry him next month in Hawaii.
We've lost the dearest of people, and we're desperate for information. Piecing together Justine's last moments before the homicide would be a small comfort as we grieve this tragedy. The death of Justine is a loss to everyone who knew her. She touched so many people with her loving and generous heart.
Now, Noor has apparently refused to be interviewed by state investigators. The other officer, Matthew Harity, has already sat down with detectives. Noor has been on the force for about 2 years. He's the first Somali-American police officer to be in this precinct, but he already has 3 citizen complaints filed against him. One was closed without discipline. The other 2 remain open, and we are attending a press conference in the next few minutes to hear from the assistant chief, the mayor, and other council members as well. Tucker?
Thanks, Dr. Christina. We appreciate it. Well, there's a lot going on in the story and a lot we don't know. Mohammed Noor was an immigrant from Somalia. Is that a relevant fact? We don't know. But it's being treated as one by many news organizations. How do you know that? Because they're not reporting it. The Washington Post, for example, did a long piece on this shooting and made no mention of Noor's nationality or immigration status. They never even mentioned his name. They wrote an entire story about this and never mentioned the cop's name. Why is that? Vincent Hill is a former Nashville police officer, and he joins us. Mr. Hill, thanks for coming on tonight. So it seems odd. A bunch of things about this seem odd to me, and maybe they're significant and maybe not. First, how common is it for a police officer to shoot someone through the door of a vehicle?
Well, Tucker, thanks for having me on. It's very uncommon for a police officer to shoot outside of a vehicle from the inside. Most departments forbid it. So I question what made this officer, Officer Noor, believe that there was an imminent threat against either his life or his partner's life to shoot 3 times inside that vehicle and strike Ms. Dedmon. I really question that.
It seems bizarre. Now, the second notable fact, it seems to me, is the body cams and the dash cam. So at least 3 cameras present, none of them on, either during the shooting, before the shooting, during the shooting, or after the shooting. Why would that be?
Well, Tucker, I don't want to speculate. There could be several reasons. Of course, body cams in general are very new to most police departments across this country. I believe Minneapolis has only been using body cams for about a year. So when officers are approaching a scene of a call, they have a lot that they're thinking about. It could be that the body cam was not one of those. I don't know why the dash cam, if it was available, wasn't on, because, of course, you're responding to a crime or reports of a crime. So at least the dash cam in itself should have been on.
Now, I always give cops the benefit of every doubt because it's a really hard job and a dangerous job. And so maybe this isn't meaningful, but you tell me what you think. This guy had been on the force for 2 years. He had 3 complaints against him. Does it seem like a lot?
For someone to have only been on a department for 2 years, it definitely seems like a lot, especially the last one, I believe, was this past May. So here we are just 2 months removed from that, and now a young lady is dead, and it's very tragic. So I really question what those reports actually said. Was it something that the department should have said, hey, maybe this officer is not fit for duty? So you have to question that.
Yeah, you certainly do. Can you, and again, there's a lot we don't know, and I can't stand it when people speculate irresponsibly. But since you've done this job, can you think of a scenario in which what happened, or what we know happened, makes sense?
Tucker, I've thought about this all day, and the only thing I can speculate from an officer point of view is there was something that made that officer believe there was an imminent threat against his life. I think there's reports now that there may have been a loud noise by the vehicle. There's reports that she startled these officers, but we have to take into account they received a call that a female was probably being sexually assaulted. So common sense should kick in and say, well, is this possibly the victim, or is this the 911 caller? I know when I've answered 911 calls, I always wanted to speak to the caller to get their perspective, to see if there's a suspect, to see if we need to set up a perimeter. So I don't understand what led this officer to believe not only did he have to take her life, but if you think about it, he put his partner's life in jeopardy by shooting across him.
It's unbelievable. I mean, whatever he thought, he cannot have imagined this was the perpetrator in a sexual assault. You wouldn't think, but who knows? Vincent, thanks a lot for that. It was really helpful.
Tucker, thank you so much.
Thank you for that.
She's the 40-year-old yoga instructor who was shot by cops in her pajamas. It happened after Justine Damond called cops to report a fight in the alley near her home in Minneapolis.
The people outside on the phone. She's online with them. We're with her now.
When the patrol car arrived, Justine started speaking to the police officer behind the wheel. Suddenly, the other cop who was seated in the passenger seat opened fire. The officer has been identified as Mohammed Noor, who became a police officer in 2014. 22-year-old Zach Damond posted this emotional video on Facebook.
My mom is dead because the police officer shot her for reasons I don't know, and I demand answers.
The cops were wearing body cams, but they were not turned on. Minneapolis Mayor Betsy Hodges.
I have a lot of questions about why the body cameras weren't on.
Cops in Minneapolis were issued the body cams after the shooting of a black motorist, Philando Castile, in a suburb last year. Justine was planning to marry fiancé Don Damond next month. He choked with emotion as he spoke outside their home.
The death of Justine is a loss to everyone who knew her. She touched so many people with her loving and generous heart.
The moment you change your mind, you begin to change your brain.
She was a New Age healer who posted her lectures on meditation to YouTube. In this video, Justine, an Australian, talked about moving to the U.S. 3 years ago.
I also have just moved from Sydney to America and had only been in the States for a few weeks, had moved my whole life over.
Her neighbors held a moving vigil for Justine and left a memorial of hearts chalked on the sidewalk along with this placard: "Why did you shoot and kill our neighbor and friend?"
It is difficult to fathom how to go forward without her in my life.
The Minneapolis police chief is out after one of her officers shot and killed an unarmed woman. It was 1 week ago that Officer Mohammed Noor shot Justine Damond. On Friday, Chief Janae Harto resigned. But as Jamie Yukas reports, the pressure is now squarely on the mayor of Minneapolis.
The deputy chief and chief of staff.
Listen! We don't want you as our mayor of Minneapolis anymore. We would like for you to move out of our city. Your police department has terrorized us enough.
Protesters shouted at Minneapolis Mayor Betsy Hodges and called for her to step down as they took over the podium at a news conference to discuss the resignation of Police Chief Janae Harto. Hodges returned later to tell reporters she would not be stepping down.
I share people's frustration about the pace of change in policing and in building community trust.
Chief Harto resigned Friday, 6 days after the fatal shooting of Justine Damond. The 40-year-old Australian called 911 last Saturday to report a disturbance outside her home. But less than a half hour later, Damond was dead. Officer Mohammed Noor, sitting in the passenger seat of the police cruiser, fired his gun past his partner in the driver's seat, killing Damond.
Justine didn't have to die.
On Thursday, Harto sought to distance the department from Noor's actions.
I believe the actions in question go against who we are as a department, how we train, and the expectations we have for our officers.
That wasn't enough for some city leaders, including Mayor Hodges, who asked for Harteau's resignation. But the fact that neither of the officers responding to Damon's 911 call had their body cameras on has raised even more questions about the department.
Through this incident, we learned what some of us already knew, is that the body camera policy was screwed from the get-go.
Harteau, the first woman to lead the Minneapolis PD, had come under sharp criticism before. The 2015 shooting of Jamar Clark, an unarmed black man, during an encounter with police, led to weeks of protests. The two officers in that case were not charged. Officer Noor is currently being investigated by the state.
I don't know if there was something that drove this decision to have the officer pull the trigger, but I'll tell you what goes against all training that we have. Officers are trained to put distance between themselves and a threat, to respond on their feet when something is happening, and never to fire a gun over the chest of their partner. That doesn't make any sense. So if this was a purposeful shot, it was against policy. If it was a mistake, then an apology needs to be given to the family. But to have the mayor come out and to say that the police department doesn't have any information, that's unconscionable and not appropriate in this day and age.
And the police department there is being rather quiet. And here's what the mayor, the Minneapolis mayor, Betsy Hodges, had to say this morning on all this. Listen.
We, as a city, have a policy now that we do not investigate ourselves, and so in critical incidents like this, I don't know what the answers are. That's the trade-off of an independent investigation, is we aren't in charge of it.
So why are authorities so quiet on this, Ed?
Well, there's a state investigation, and justice should be very important to this conversation. But the mayor has to take charge of this situation in her own city. And quite frankly, the police have information. A sergeant responded to that scene. They have the tapes of the calls. They have evidence technicians that went to the scene. This is not a case where the state has this information and you can defer all of this stuff to the state. You need to grab a hold of this and to be compassionate to this family. It's a very dangerous situation for policing everywhere when one agency responds like this. It casts a pall over the whole business.
What does it tell you that not one, but two officers showed up on the scene, neither turned their body cams on? That really seems to be at the root of the question and the problem here.
Well, it's certainly an issue, and it needs to be looked at. What is the culture of that department? The rules are pretty clear, but do the police officers follow the rules? That's a question that needs to be answered. But, you know, the published reports indicate there were at least 3 witnesses to this. There was another police officer in the car that they say was shocked by the gunshot that went off. This is what we're hearing from published reports. If that information is true, then really the video is the least of the worries here. You have a lot of witnesses that can tell you exactly what happened. That information should be sent to the family so that they can deal with this.
And you're looking at the officer there on the screen, Ed, believed to have shot her. Somali-American Mohammed Noor came to the U.S. at a young age, believed he wanted to be a police officer, said it was his calling.
Justine did not deserve to die. A badge and a gun is not a license to kill. Police need to be held accountable for their actions, just like everyone else. Demand justice for Justine.